You're listening to Religica, Religica.
Thank you very much, Marianne Williamson, for taking the time this morning to be with us on a podcast through Religica.
Well, thank you. I am honored to be here, and I'm grateful to you for having me.
You are an author, lecturer, activist, and founder of at least 2 grassroots organizations that assist those on the margins. You've run for political office in the past, and at this time of the recording, you're running for Democratic nominee to be President of the United States.
And all of my work has had to do with the inquiry and the activation into the realization, not only of our true spiritual identity, but also our extension of that love and identity, our purpose, our mission on the earth. So whether it has to do with personal transformation or political activism, it's all the same, how to not only be love, but extend love.
You've written 13 books and multiple bestsellers. You're tapping into something that people need, kind of hunger points that they feel out there. What is the pattern of response that confirms for you, yeah, these are the 2 or 3 things that readers and people in general are really caring about today?
We were created to be with one another. We were created to love one another. We are hardwired for connection, but we have developed a civilization too often posited on disconnection, posited on competition rather than cooperation. And that leads to fear rather than love. It leads to isolation and loneliness and worse, all manner of societal dysfunction that arises from that. So when I speak to that level and talk about how something is deeply wrong, people know that. People hearken to that because we all know it. We all know that just an incremental fix and an incremental change on the level of public policy is working at these things on the level of effect, but not cause, on the level of symptom, but not addressing what the deeper disease is that has created all this dysfunction. And that's why I'm speaking to how might we be a more functional society? The conversation of morality is exactly that. Morality means that which is aligned with the best of our wisdom and our love. And how do we create a functional society? How do we create a society in which people are that it is more probable that people can thrive? Because you can't have that in a society where there is so much disconnection, so much fear, so much loneliness, so much want, so many people living at a level of survival economically and physically. People cannot thrive within that. And I believe that our function, not only as individuals, but as a society, that means politically as well, is to behave. That's what public policy is. Public policy is our collective behavior. It's our government's behavior. It's where our government is spending our money, our collective money. So you want to spend your collective money on the things that do more to create situations of separation? Or do you want to spend your collective money on things that have more to do with increasing the probability where people can thrive? And that's, to me, what a political leader should be saying. So I'm saying it.
Thank you for saying that. And when you talk about the prosperity, the kind of deeper societal or even spiritual prosperity, emotional, psychological, or psychosocial prosperity that is essential in a self-governed and healthy democracy, how do you account for the 2 or 3 healthy virtues inside of a prosperous spirituality that all Americans, rural or urban, should be able to count on, not only in ourselves, but from one another?
Basic kindness. Basic kindness, when you see it in this country, is after there's been a tragedy. After there's been a tragedy, people show up to help each other, give blood, bring food, bring clothes, care for the sick, help the dying. That is who we naturally are. That is what we are hardwired to be for each other. And when there's a tragedy, we are shocked. The system is shocked into that knowing, because that knowing is the way we survive. But that's the way we need to be in order to prevent tragedies. I remember when, not just the century, obviously, but the millennial turn. And we all made a big deal about that day, remember?
I do.
And I heard a story from a friend of mine that really impacted me. She talked about being on the subway in New York City that day. And it was the same subway ride she takes every day. But that day, everybody was breaking out champagne. Nothing was really different about that day, except the social contract. That was all that was different. We gave ourselves permission to love each other. So most days on that same subway, people either aren't in the mood to do that or would be considered crazy. But on that day, all it was no change outside. It was a change inside. And we gave ourselves permission for one day to behave like brothers on this planet.
So what's happening on the other side of this? We have the rise of populism, of disagreeableness around areas of policy, but also public discourse every day. Many of us, I think, in this country didn't think we would arrive at this particular place. How do you account for that?
Any intelligent observer should have thought, would have thought. I talked in my book, Healing the Soul of America, that I wrote in 1997. All the things that are these stage 4 societal cancers today were present in the 1990s as stage 1. An oncologist doesn't say, hey, it's only stage 1 cancer, let's ignore it. Within an individual's life, if there is a severe lack of love, lack of care, lack of compassion, personal dysfunction is more probable. And in a society where there is so much disconnection, so much lack of the kind of human relationship that forms the fabric of a healthy social order, collective dysfunction is inevitable. The idea that we would make money the false god that we have made it, the way that we have turned the powers of government over to huge multinational forces to use for their own purposes just to increase their own short-term profits. Anybody with any psychological, emotional, or spiritual perspicacity could have told you, as I've been saying for decades, oh, there are going to be big problems from this. Love is the bottom line in a healthy life. I think a lot of Americans are disempowered because we don't know the larger story. You know, you have 11 states in this country that don't even require half a year of American history or government or civics. That's dangerous. Mm-hmm. Because if you didn't learn about the Bill of Rights when you were a child, then when you're an adult and the Bill of Rights is under assault, you don't know to be horrified. So I always say to people, pick up one of those books like American History for Dummies. Yeah. Because when you actually have a sense of the Declaration of Independence, the aspirational, enlightened principles involved in all men are created equal, involved in God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Once again, God gave. When you look at the fact that those principles were laid down by men who themselves, 41 out of the 54 or 56, whatever it was, owned slaves. So when we recognize that that's our characterological DNA, that dichotomy, that polarity, that struggle between the fact that we are based on the most enlightened principles, but have been since the beginning of our country's history, at times the most violent perpetrators of against those principles, then we have a sense of where we belong, because we have a sense and a realization that every generation decides its chapter in this longer narrative. So we had slavery, but then a generation rose up with abolition. We had the suppression of women, then a generation rose up with women's suffrage. We had institutionalized white supremacy and segregation, and then a generation rose up with the civil rights movement. We are heirs of a country that had slavery, that had segregation, that had suppression of women. We are also the heirs of a country that produced abolitionists and women suffragettes and civil rights movement. We got to get our mojo on here. Right. We've got to rise to the occasion. We have to find within ourselves and activate within ourselves the same spirit of rambunctiousness and healthy spiritual rebellion that was at play when this country was founded to begin with. We said to an autocratic, authoritarian, aristocratic system, no, we're going to do it another way. And now, and even though we've never fully actualized that, at our best moments, we've tried. And it's time for our generation to play our part and to similarly say, as others before us have, to basically a sociopathic economic system which shows no remorse, no empathy, no compassion for people or for planet, and a government that has been corrupted. It is time for we the people to step in and to say no.
It's interesting in terms of the Declaration of Independence, like there is an aspirational quality to it, how we should all be with one another, as you're mentioning. And it also warns us against the perniciousness of cruelty, in particular an external despot. And when we think about even the nature of a U.S. president, what should be the qualities of leadership? As you're thinking about the presidency, what are the 2 or 3 qualities that are just absolutely essential as a leader today in that position?
What I've said about this president before, I'll say again. He seems to lack a visceral taste for democracy. The problem with our generation is we've lost our psychological and emotional connection to the principles of the Declaration of Independence, and he's certainly a prime example of that. In the Jewish religion, it says every generation must rediscover God for itself. And every generation needs to rediscover our own psychological and emotional connection to those principles. Otherwise, they could be written on marble walls. They could be inscribed in parchment. But if they're not inscribed in our hearts, then they lose their moral force. And that happened. Donald Trump didn't do that. Donald Trump is an expression and consequence of the fact that it was already done, that those principles were no longer alive. Because if those principles are alive in your heart and you realize how aberrant his behavior is, his policies are the opposite of respect for all men are created equal.
But we're somewhat like a frog boiling in water, aren't we? I mean, we see misogynism and racism and other qualities coming from this president in this country that seems to fall flat on our moral ears, as though as a republic, we don't have, as citizens in this republic, a right to stand in a contrary-wise position to this, to call it for what it is, an aberration, to say that this isn't the leadership that we expect from any of our elected leaders, in particular the President of the United States.
Well, I don't know. You're talking to me and I'm saying it. I'm running for president.
That's true.
We all need to realize that this has been going on for a long time. This cancer has been in our system, the chronic disengagement from the things that matter most collectively. This has been going on for about 40 years. But I do believe there's an awakening. And I think we've been the frogs in the water. But there's an awakening. And in some ways, Donald Trump has caused the awakening. A lot of people have woken up who have not been, quote, into politics, who are going, whoa, whoa. And so I don't see it as a lack of possibility or opportunity here. But I'm running for president because now we have to harness this awakening and the power of this awakening. You know, Donald Trump is not just a politician, he's a phenomenon.
Yeah.
And he will not be defeated by an insider political game. He will only be defeated when we create a phenomenon of equal force.
Let's talk a moment just in terms, as you mentioned, existential threat. And you're on the record, not just simply this presidency, but also race reparations, for instance. Climate change is an existential threat. All of these in one way or another are symptomatic of a deeper phenomenon of negligence that we need to get our hearts and minds around. How do people respond to that in public?
I get massive applause and standing ovations from people in the whitest states in America. New Hampshire, Iowa. Americans are good people. We're good people. I'm not saying we're better than other people, but we're good people. The average American is not a racist. The average American is just woefully undereducated about the history of race. When I talk about the fact that enslaved people were brought over in 1619, that slavery was not abolished for 250 years, that was followed by another 100 years of domestic terror, basically, institutionalized white violence against Black people. When I talk about the economic gap that existed that has never been addressed, when I talk about the fact that Germany has given $89 billion in reparations to Jewish organizations since World War II. When I lay out the whole narrative, and when I talk about the fact that as president, I want to be someone that helps America close one chapter and begin a new one. Mm-hmm. And that for a country, just like for an individual, you can't have the future you want. You can't have unlimited possibilities in the future unless you're willing to clean up the past. And when it comes to race in America, and when it comes to also Native Americans, we have to clean these things up. Let us be the generation that cleans this up.
I've been watching how you're presented in the news, even on the platform of the stage for the debates, often further off on the margin. Does it feel like that's a case on those platforms, or?
Oh, yeah, of course. And even to the point of abject lies about me that I'm anti-medicine or anti-science. A grifter, referred to as a grifter, which is, of course, for a woman who has a 35-year career is, very personal insulting. That I'm even dangerous or crazy and all that stuff. So it's certainly a challenge for me on a personal level to practice what I preach.
Yeah.
Friends will say to me, Marianne, you need to rise above. We need to see you rising above. We need to see you not getting defensive. And I've seen, in the Course in Miracles, there's a line, if I defend myself, I'm attacked. I've seen a couple of interviews where, Marianne, you should have kept your mouth shut. So it's, on one hand, difficult to see yourself lied about and smeared and mischaracterized. But on the other hand, this is politics today.
Yeah.
And I knew it before I did this, but you can't really, you know it. You know it's coming, but you don't really know it until it's happening to you. You know it, but you don't know it on the level that you know it once it's happening. What makes me encouraged is what you just said, how much people are hearing anyway. Mm-hmm. That's why there's been this whole meme about ironic to non-ironic support.
Right.
People talking about how they had one opinion of me and then heard what I actually said and go, whoa, that's not who I thought she was, because they had gotten their information through a filter of an institutional resistance to my candidacy. We have a presidential campaign now where we have the foot in the door, and that is what we're saying. And now it's up to every individual. Do you want that in the game or not? I'm trying my best. I'm not saying I'm not a perfect person. I'm not saying I get it right every moment, 24/7. But I do believe people, if they're looking honestly, can see I'm getting it right more often than not. And this is real. And what you said was true also, that some very serious journalists acknowledge that.
I think one of the things that attract those senior reporters and a greater public to many of the things that you've said is your resistance to incrementalizing our way to the future. Let me give an example. Your desire to create a Department of Peace. Now, some people may say, well, what does that mean? But I think what you're saying, what I hear you saying, is that the way we've thought about the nature of peace and war in general terms in this country is bankrupt, and there's a deeper discussion that needs to take place. It's not that you're standing contrary-wise to, say, the importance of the armed forces.
No, not at all.
Or for those who are working as peace activists around the country and the world. All of that is relevant to a deeper conversation. So you're president of the United States. What does a Department of Peace do in 3 years effectively doing its work?
First of all, when I was growing up, politicians used the phrase peace and prosperity. Today, they don't even say it. They don't even talk about peace and prosperity because that's not the overt goal anymore. You can't say your goal is peace and prosperity and make your goal short-term profit maximization for huge corporate entities at the same time. They sometimes conflict.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you can't just take medicine, you have to cultivate health. And you can't just endlessly prepare for war, you also have to cultivate peace. War is the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of war. But where we spend $750 billion on preparing for war a year, we spend $40 billion on the State Department. The State Department has within it $17 billion out of that $40 billion goes to USAID, which is humanitarian assistance, and $1 billion, less than $1 billion, goes to the peacekeeping agencies. Now, if you put all those things together, once again, $40 billion compared to $750 billion, what are the things that create peace? They are diplomacy, development, mediation, expanding economic opportunities for women, reducing violence against women, expanding educational opportunities for children, and ameliorating unnecessary human suffering wherever possible. You create those factors proactively, and they increase the incidence of peace and decrease the incidence of violence in any system, either domestic or international. And that is why, as president, my international policies, and domestic policies for that matter, will be based on the core principle: what will help people thrive? Because whatever helps human beings thrive increases peace and increases prosperity. It puts people in a place where peaceful human interaction is more probable, and where people expressing their creativity and productivity, and which creates prosperity, is more probable. And our system now is so corrupted that, while I'm not, as you said, I'm not critiquing the military here. This is not about the military. This is about the political decisions that are made to put so many more resources behind things that do not, in fact, directly impact our national security so much as the bottom line of defense contractors, and keep withholding needed resources from those peacekeeping factors. So in a Williamson presidency, with the Department of Peace, we will have a robust and equal simultaneous relationship between the military and the peace builders, the head of the USAID, for instance. It will be a cabinet level secretary that when I sit with my national security team, I will not just be speaking with military or even military analysts in terms of the geopolitical realities as we now define them, but rather expand that conversation to include the people who are doing the peace building work that will make all the difference in the world.
There's something about the capacity of our public to have a generative imagination for significant change, what has been at the forefront of our leadership in the world. Not to impose ourselves on the world, but that there's something that's been trusted in us about a generative collective imagination alongside others. Would you say that's true?
I would say that we were born of that. At our best moments, we have been that. And for the last few years, we've stopped being that.
Okay.
And it is time for us to be that again. Yeah. That is the generative imagination, that something else is possible. This country was born of that. After centuries of aristocratic domination, it was possible to create a country in which everybody has a shot. Everybody has an opportunity. Everybody is guaranteed the inalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness because God gives them that. That is the essence of generative imagination. So much of what America has done has been born of that. So much of our science, so much of our culture, so much of our art, so much of our society. And then once we started being corrupted by an economic system, and this started 40 years ago, where our bottom line, instead of leading with our creativity, instead of leading with our productivity, instead of leading with our liberal values of basic fundamental goodwill, we began leading with just this advocacy for corporate power and corporate money. It is a corruption. It is a corruption of the soul of America. It is a corruption of our government. It has hijacked our value system. Before that, we made money and we were abundant because we were dedicated to higher principle. So going back to our deeper democratic mission and humanitarian principles and values of liberalism, in a larger sense, will only increase our prosperity on every level. We need to get back to that regenerative imagination. Now, this is why people like yourself and myself and those of us who understand that concept are so important. There are so many young people who don't even remember that. They weren't taught it in school and they've never seen it in their lifetime. So if you don't know that intellectually, or if you haven't experienced it, they don't know. We need to shout it from the rooftops now. That's why our task is so urgent.
There's a number of colleagues who are meeting next month, actually at the end of this month, at a major university in this country to talk about the nature of gratitude. How do we understand gratitude within society, which I think is akin to what we're discussing in terms of generosity. If generosity is outward facing, there's something about gratitude with one another that has joy somewhere in the center of it.
Live your life in service to those who are not as lucky as you. There's not enough. We're a nation acting sometimes like a bunch of spoiled brats. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we fail to realize how lucky we are. The fact that let's look at what we're doing right now. There are things I've said on this program with you, particularly saying them as a woman. Mm-hmm. There are many countries in the world where I would be hauled off to jail and possibly tortured for saying a fraction of what I say on this campaign. Maybe it's because I grew up with a father who, being the son of immigrants, so aware of what this country offered to people. Maybe it was because I traveled as a child. Behind the Iron Curtain, I was present in places where people were not allowed to just say whatever they wanted to say. Mm-hmm. We have so much to be grateful for here. Do we have a lot to identify that are problems that need to be handled? Absolutely. But I think with that gratitude comes a sense, not just, well, I have the right to do this or I have the right to do that, but I have the responsibility to be among those in our generation who are going to protect these freedoms, nurture these freedoms, expand these freedoms, stand for these freedoms in the larger world, in the globe, where that is the great responsibility of America. Not just that we have that imagination for ourselves, but that generative imagination lights up the planet and always has historically. That, to me, comes with gratitude, the responsibility to pass along what I have been fortunate enough to receive.
What concerns me as we're speaking, Marianne, is that what you mentioned earlier, there is a kind of cultural amnesia that we've developed about the history of the best of what we can be. How we pass that along when we've forgotten what we should remember?
Well, a lot of it has to do with lack of education. And I want to say something else. I'm a lefty. I'm a left-wing progressive Democrat. But you know what? On that particular issue, high-minded conservatives are better at it. We are a good country that has done some brilliant things and has done some awful things. And we're people. We're people. So I think just like some people on the right need a deeper willingness to talk about what's wrong, sometimes people on the left need a deeper willingness to talk about what we've done right.
In terms of the moderating capacity of a president to be able to bring all members of society together, to see one another amidst our diversities and to respect one another, how does a president of the United States bring these different communities together in order to address violence in our country?
We are united by our common principles. And that is what I believe we need a president to do now more than anything, is to articulate what are the principles of our Declaration of Independence? What are these principles to which we hold mutual fealty and common fealty? I think the American people are far more intelligent and far more noble, by the way, than the conventional political system seems to realize. And I think people hear you on the level that you speak. And I find when I speak to deep intelligence and nobility in people, that's what I see coming back at me.
Citizenry all has a hallowed responsibility, and the nobility is part of that responsibility, active on each other's behalf and in the country and in the world. Wouldn't that be a significant thing to remember that we seem to have amnesia around?
Mahatma Gandhi said that politics should be sacred. And he didn't mean religious in some doctrinaire or dogmatic way. He meant what you just said, that it should be a collective field where we have all risen to our best, that the collective wisdom, that's what makes American democracy so profound, that Jefferson said we must have public education so that all of us have critical thought processes that are honed. We must have freedom of press so people get the information they need, freedom of assembly so people can talk about these things, and freedom of protest so that people can make the changes. And when you say we have collective amnesia, I go back. Too many people haven't been taught it to begin with, and they haven't seen it demonstrated. But I think that people like yourself and myself, and there are millions of us who do know these things matter, who are talking about these things, who are writing books about them, who are doing podcasts about them. We just need to know that political and social change is not on a horizontal axis, it's on a vertical axis.
Yeah.
Think less, too many people in the political realm want to dumb down their message to get more people to agree. We need to go deeper with our message and not even worry about how many people agree with us, because the resonance and the power of 10 people whose minds are joined in a true idea ultimately has more power than 100 people joined in a superficial, shallow, untrue idea.
Yes.
You have been listening to Religica. If you'd like to learn more about this laboratory, check us out at www.religica.org.